London. A damp, raw dawn clings to the grey rooftops, slowly creeping over the Thames, chasing away the last stubborn remnants of the night mist. The air is pierced by a biting cold, the bitter scent of river mud and iron settling on the damp banks. And there, beneath one of the city's most iconic, most ancient structures, Blackfriars Bridge, or as it's also known, the Bridge of Blackfriars, a fisherman, out for an early catch, stumbled upon something that sent shivers down his spine. His gaze, accustomed to the ghostly light of early morning, caught on something dark, ominously swaying from the scaffolding like a silent, grim warning cast up from the river's depths. It was a body. The body of Roberto CALVI, a man known in informed circles as God's banker, or, even more ominously, as the banker of God. He hung there, a lifeless puppet whose strings had been cut, swaying in the cold morning wind above the murky river waters. His eyes stared into the dull London sky, empty and frozen, as if seeking an answer in the clouds. And did you know that in the pockets of his meticulously tailored, now water-ravaged suit, there were bricks? Their weight was substantial, designed to serve one single horrific purpose: to sink the body to the bottom of the Thames, to forever conceal not only the man, but also the truth he might have held. But the current carried him to the bank, washing ashore a terrifying dead secret that could not be ignored. CALVI's death immediately spawned a frenzy of rumors, whispers of a ritualistic killing closely linked to his membership in the powerful, ominous P2 Masonic Lodge, swept across Europe like a wildfire, burning away any hope for a simple explanation. The symbolism of the Bridge of Blackfriars, named after the Dominican order, seemed an ominous omen for a man whose entire life was so intricately intertwined with the church, ensnaring it in his financial webs. Was it more than mere coincidence? Was it a meticulously crafted message intended for those who understood its hidden meanings? CALVI's death was not just the tragedy of one man. No, it was the culmination of a colossal financial scandal that shook not only Italy to its core, but also the entire Catholic world, like an earthquake awakening ancient shadows. On the eve of his death, CALVI's flagship bank, Banco Ambrosiano, collapsed like a house of cards, stripped of its foundation and support. It left behind a staggering deficit of, imagine this, $1.3 billion. This bankruptcy became the largest in Italy's post-war history. Like a tsunami, it threatened to engulf the country's entire banking system, leaving behind only ruins and chaos. At first glance, Roberto CALVI's death was hastily declared a suicide. It was simpler that way, more convenient for many influential figures. But too much evidence, too many blatant inconsistencies pointed to something far more sinister, to a cold-blooded, meticulously planned murder executed with brutal precision. And most importantly, the trail of this investigation, like bloodstains on fresh snow, inexorably led, directly behind the impenetrable walls of the Vatican, to its mysterious bank, known to the world as the Institute for the Works of Religion, the IOR. Then, in those dark days, a tormenting question arose in the mind of every thinking person. How could an institution, originally founded for lofty religious works, become so deeply and irrevocably entangled in the affairs of the criminal underworld, secret societies, and brutal murders? This was not just a story of financial collapse. It was a dark saga of boundless power, all-consuming corruption, and a desperate struggle for the soul of one of the world's most enigmatic and powerful financial institutions. We delve into this labyrinth where the threads of spiritual service and worldly greed, faith and betrayal, intertwine into a single deadly knot threatening to strangle the very idea of sanctity. This is a story of how avarice, like a poisonous ivy, entangles sacred walls, transforming them into a prison for truth. Long ago, in 1942, at the height of the Second World War, as the world reeled from the roar of battles, Pope Pius XII, seeking to protect the Church's treasures from the raging chaos, established the Vatican Bank. Officially, it was named the Institute for the Works of Religion, the IOR. Its declared purpose was noble: to manage the assets of Catholic orders, missions, and charitable organizations worldwide. like a loyal steward, safeguarding sacred donations and ensuring their preservation in turbulent times. This step was presented as a precautionary measure intended to ensure the Church's financial stability, its ability to continue its mission of service and charity despite global upheavals. The origins of the Holy See's financial apparatus, of course, were rooted in the papal treasury, which had functioned for centuries, from the earliest days of the papacy. This treasury collected donations, tithes, and taxes to support a vast administration and charitable projects. Ill-gotten gains from drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and other monstrous crimes desperately needed to be laundered to appear legitimate. The mafia, with its predatory instinct and a nose for money, saw the Vatican as a reliable, untouchable partner, capable of legalizing billions obtained from illicit activities without intrusive questions or scrutiny. Thus began the process of a sinister convergence of two worlds, a spiritual institution called to holiness and purity, and a world of organized crime, mired in violence and sin. They were united by a shared, deadly interest in financial secrecy, like two predators sharing a single kill in a dark corner. What could go wrong when sanctity and criminality enter into such a close alliance? During this complex, murky period, when the lines between good and evil blurred beyond recognition, when moral principles gave way to greed, Archbishop Paul Marcinkus stepped onto the scene, a charismatic, imposing American of Lithuanian descent. He was a figure straight out of a crime novel, a man with a mysterious past and an equally mysterious present. Marcinkus, who once served as Pope Paul VI's personal bodyguard and held key positions in the Vatican administration, took over as head of the Vatican Bank, leading it from 1971 to 1989. He was dubbed the man who looked like a banker and spoke like a bishop, which only underscored his sinister dual nature, his ability to mask worldly shrewdness with spiritual eloquence. It was Marcinkus, this man of mystery, who became the business partner and de facto patron of the murdered Roberto CALVI. His shadow, his unseen protector, providing cover for his operations. He was also connected to Michele Sindona, another notoriously corrupt banker whose ties to the mafia and Freemasonry were deep and repulsive, extending throughout the criminal underworld. Marcinkus became the architect of many questionable deals that brought the IOR to the forefront of international financial scandals. Like a puppeteer pulling the strings of an invisible theater. Under his leadership, the Vatican Bank underwent significant changes, transforming from a conservative institution safeguarding sacred donations into an active, ruthless player in global markets, capable of undertaking risky and opaque operations. His immunity from Italian justice, granted by Vatican citizenship, made him absolutely untouchable by investigations, like a phantom eluding justice. Marcinkus's immunity became a symbol of the impunity that enveloped all Vatican financial operations, like a deadly fog concealing the truth. This untouchability only fueled suspicions of deeper, darker secrets being hidden, making the world wonder, what else was hidden behind these sacred walls that was so crucial to keep secret? At the heart of all these machinations, at the very center of the web of corruption, lay a unique artifact, the legal and political status of the Vatican Bank. The IOR was not an ordinary commercial bank in the traditional sense. It was a financial instrument with superpowers, an almost mystical power over laws, allowing it to operate outside conventional frameworks. Its sovereignty meant that Italian authorities could not conduct searches, seize documents, or arrest employees without the Holy See's permission, which was virtually impossible to obtain. This inviolability created practically ideal, incubator-like conditions for financial crimes and asset concealment, like an invisible dome for villains, protecting them from any external interference. The IOR's level of secrecy surpassed even the strictest Swiss banks, offering complete anonymity through numbered accounts that were impossible to trace to a specific individual. Like a code that cannot be cracked, account holders enjoyed complete tax immunity, which attracted even more illicit capital, like flies to honey. The Vatican Bank was not accountable to any international financial regulators or oversight bodies, such as the International Monetary Fund or the European Central Bank. like a ship sailing without rudder or sails in the ocean of global finance, obeying no rules but its own. In fact, the IOR reported to only one person on the planet, the Pope. This ensured absolute centralization of power concentrated in one pair of hands. Convenient, isn't it, when the sole overseer is the highest spiritual authority, who, ideally, should be above worldly intrigues. This mechanism, originally created to protect church assets and ensure its mission, transformed into a perfect weapon for financial crimes. The name of God, sacred and inviolable, was used as a shield to protect dubious deals, covering up worldly avarice and lawlessness, defiling the very concept of faith. The nature of the IOR's activities allowed it to become a central link in a sinister web, connecting crime, politics, and religion in a single unbreakable tangle. This unique structure provided a safe haven for capital obtained from drugs, weapons, and corruption. Like a black hole, devouring morality and leaving only emptiness behind. Papal authority, called to spiritual purity and moral leadership, found itself unwittingly involved in the dirtiest of worldly sins, avarice, the thirst for wealth. Was it possible to avoid this, or was it an inevitable path for such a powerful and wealthy institution? Is it possible that the very nature of immense wealth, even in the hands of the Church, carries the seed of decomposition? The consequences of the scandal surrounding CALVI's death and the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano dealt a devastating blow to the Vatican's reputation, like an explosion demolishing everything around it, leaving only ash and pain. The entire world watched as the spiritual center of Catholicism found itself on the front lines of an international financial scandal, becoming its main victim, its name tarnished. The Holy See, despite immense pressure from all sides, despite public anger and outrage, officially denied legal culpability in the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, attempting to clear its name and save face. However, as a gesture of goodwill, the Vatican paid hundreds of millions of dollars to the bank's creditors, a sum estimated by some to exceed $250 million. This payment, made without admitting guilt, was perceived as indirect, yet unequivocal confirmation of involvement and a desperate attempt to avoid further, deeper investigation that could uncover even more unsightly secrets. What were they so desperately trying to hide if they were willing to part with such a huge sum just to bury the case? The blow to the Church's moral authority was immense. It left deep bleeding scars on the trust of millions of faithful worldwide, who began to doubt the purity and holiness of their spiritual leaders. Thus began a long and agonizing war for reforms within the Vatican, a struggle against an entrenched system akin to a battle with a hydra where two new heads grow in place of everyone cut off. Pope John Paul II, though not immediately, recognized the urgent need for change, understanding that without it, the Church would lose its moral foundation. But he faced enormous resistance from the old guard of the Curia, conservative cardinals and monsignors unwilling to change. His first, hesitant attempts to reform the IOR were met with sabotage and internal opposition, unwilling to lose their privileges, like wolves defending their prey, their piece of the pie they had been sharing for decades. So who truly held the keys to the Vatican treasury? The Pope or the shadowy cardinals behind him? Pope Benedict XVI, being more academic and less political, but deeply aware of the moral and theological aspects, continued this fight for transparency and compliance with international standards. He began the complex process of bringing the IOR into line with the requirements of the Council of Europe's Moneyval anti-money laundering group, paving a new path towards financial purity. The Financial Intelligence Authority, FIA, was created to oversee the bank's operations, marking a first but decisive step towards external accountability, towards an openness that had long been ignored. However, resistance within the Vatican remained powerful, hidden like treacherous undercurrents capable of dragging down any ship, and reforms proceeded agonizingly slowly, encountering endless bureaucratic hurdles like a sticky swamp that refuses to release its victim. Will there be light at the end of this tunnel, or is this merely a temporary lull before a new storm? But the true cleanse, radical and uncompromising, only began with the election of Pope Francis in 2013. He immediately set his course on eradicating corruption with surgical precision, like a surgeon removing a tumor threatening the entire organism. Francis declared to the world that St. Peter had no bank account, clearly signaling his intentions for a desecularization reform of the Church, returning it to its original poverty and simplicity. He embarked on radical measures, closing thousands of suspicious accounts in the IOR that did not comply with his new, strict regulations, which demanded full transparency and justification. International audits were introduced, designed to ensure full transparency of the Vatican's financial operations, like a spotlight illuminating the darkest corners where light had not penetrated for decades. Or Pope Francis appointed new, independent experts to manage the IOR, ruthlessly excluding many appointees of the old system, those who were part of the problem, not the solution. Thousands of accounts with no direct connection to religious purposes were closed or transferred to other financial institutions, stripping privileges from those who used the Vatican's sanctity for personal gain. This was an unprecedented step, demonstrating the pontiff's determination to break with the dark past of the God's bankers, like cutting the rope connecting to the abyss to save those who could still be saved. But is it enough to wash away the sins of decades that have permeated the Vatican's walls, like blood soaked into stone? But can an institution that served as a quiet haven for dirty money and worldly temptations for decades ever be completely purified? This question hangs in the air, heavy and insistent, like the scent of old secrets. The conflict between the Church's spiritual mission and the allure of immense money, power, and anonymity is eternal and deeply rooted. Like a weed grown in holy ground, whose roots have spread so deep that it cannot be pulled out without harming the entire plant. The battle for the soul of the Vatican Bank continues right now, and its outcome is unpredictable, like a battle in a fog, where neither foe nor ally is visible. This is a story of how even the most sacred institutions can be infected by worldly defilement, and of the eternal struggle for their purification, for their redemption, which may never fully arrive. Can the Church fully free itself from the shadows of the past, or will the conflict between sanctity and greed haunt it forever, like a curse passed down through generations? This question remains open, and every new attempt at reform is met with the ghosts of long-past sins that refuse to depart. Uncovering the full picture of past scandals is essential for understanding the current struggle for financial ethics in the Vatican, like the key to deciphering a complex code. The history of the IOR is a cautionary, chilling tale of the temptations of power and wealth, capable of distorting the noblest intentions, transforming them into something monstrous. From the earliest papal treasuries to modern-day billions, the Vatican has always been a crossroads of the spiritual and the worldly, the sacred and the profane, heaven and hell on earth. The IOR scandals highlight the immense complexity of managing a vast global institution in a world full of temptations and pitfalls. How can institutional immunity, created for protection, become a loophole for criminality, transforming into its ally and accomplice? CALVI, Marcinkus, Sindona, merely the tip of the iceberg in a complex, tangled web of connections reaching deep into Italian politics and the criminal underworld. CALVI's death became a catalyst that exposed decades of hidden financial manipulations, like a torn veil that exposed a shameful truth. He was not just a banker, but a key figure connecting the IOR with Italian business and secret societies, a man who knew too much. The rebirth plan, Piano di Rinascita Democratica, of the P2 Masonic Lodge to which CALVI belonged, aimed at restructuring Italy at a power grab, creating a state within a state. This lodge united high-ranking officials, military figures, businessmen, and bankers, including CALVI himself, creating a shadow government controlling the country from behind the scenes. P2 ruthlessly used the IOR for its shadowy operations, creating a pervasive network of influence and control spanning all spheres of life. Michele Sindona, another key player, was known as the mafia banker and an intermediary between the IOR and organized crime, like a guide into the world of darkness. Sindona, a friend of Marcinkus, participated in fictitious deals that helped launder money for the criminal underworld, turning dirty into clean, deceiving justice. He was convicted for the bankruptcy of the Franklin National Bank in the United States of America and had ties to the Gambino and Incerillo crime families. His hands were drenched in blood, stained by countless crimes. The relationship between CALVI, Sindona, and Marcinkus formed a sinister triangle of financial corruption and mutual dependence, where each was linked to the other, as in a deadly game. Each of them used the IOR for their own purposes, exploiting its unique sovereign status to acquire untold riches. Financial pyramids and shell companies created by CALVI allowed funds to be funneled from Banco Ambrosiano into offshore IOR accounts, like secret channels through which billions flowed. These offshore companies, registered in Luxembourg, Panama, and Liechtenstein, were nominally owned by the IOR, providing them with an additional layer of protection. Thus, the IOR provided CALVI with the legitimacy and protection necessary for his machinations, becoming his accomplice, willing or unwitting. All of this occurred within the historical context of Italy's years of lead, when political terrorism, kidnappings, murders, and corruption were at their peak, tearing the country apart. The Vatican Bank found itself at the center of this turbulence, acting not only as a custodian, but also as an active, sometimes unclean, player in this dangerous game. Rumors of the IOR's ties to the United States of America's Central Intelligence Agency during the Cold War, allegedly to finance anti-communist movements worldwide, add intrigue and deepen the shadow. Vatican diplomacy and its desire to maintain its political stance in a bipolar world may have led to dangerous compromises with dark forces. The IOR's possible involvement in funding the Solidarity trade union in Poland as part of the Vatican's anti-communist strategy raises a sharp question. These operations, though they had political justification and possibly noble aims, also required the use of opaque financial channels hidden from public view. A tormenting moral dilemma arises. Is it permissible to use dubious means to achieve good political ends? And does this not transform the ends themselves into something questionable? Public outrage after the CALVI scandal led to unprecedented pressure on the Vatican from the Italian government and international organizations. Representatives of the Italian government, such as Prosecutor Guido Rossi, desperately tried to hold Marcinkus accountable, striving for justice. However, his status as a Vatican citizen and cardinal protected him from Italian justice, causing anger and frustration among those who believed in the law. This sparked fierce debates about Vatican sovereignty and its boundaries in the context of international law and financial ethics. There was an undeniable argument that if the Vatican participates in the international financial system, it must adhere to its rules, like any other state or institution. Pope John Paul II took the first hesitant steps towards reform, but they were insufficient to eradicate systemic problems, like trying to stop a flood with a spoon when a dam was needed. He commissioned an investigation into the IOR's activities, but its findings were never fully published, disappearing into the labyrinths of bureaucracy, hidden from public view. The internal power struggle within the Curia became an insurmountable obstacle to any radical change, as too many benefited from the existing state of affairs. The Vatican's old guard, represented by cardinals and monsignors, had their own interests and advantages from the existing system. Like spiders protecting their web, they clung to their privileges. Many of them had used the IOR for personal or diocesan needs for decades, unwilling to give up the anonymity and privileges that this unique bank offered. The influence of clerical clans and their resistance to external control and transparency was colossal, almost insurmountable. Benedict XVI, a strict theologian, recognized the moral necessity of purification, but his attempts were cautious and slow. Moving like a snail, he advanced, trying not to disturb the established balance. He sought to bring the IOR into compliance with the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, international standards, so that the Vatican would not appear as a haven for criminals. The implementation of the first set of anti-money laundering AML rules in the Vatican was a significant step, demonstrating movement in the right direction. However, Moneyval reports repeatedly pointed out deficiencies in the implementation of these rules and the lack of real oversight. This created the impression that the Vatican was merely simulating reforms, unwilling to fully disclose its financial secrets. Shock. Isn't it hypocrisy when a spiritual institution plays such games? The VATICAN'S scandal under Benedict XVI, when confidential documents exposing internal intrigues and corruption were published, showed the depth of the problem. These leaks revealed that even reforming popes faced profound resistance within their own administration, which did not want change. The arrival of Pope Francis was a true earthquake for the Vatican's financial system. His humble lifestyle and calls for a poor church for the poor resonated with the need for financial cleansing, like a bolt from the blue, awakening hope for change. Francis was not afraid to directly challenge the powerful forces within the Curia who had so long held the reins. He closed approximately 4,800 accounts that did not meet the IOR's strict new criteria, showing that his intentions were serious. This meant that many individuals and institutions who had previously enjoyed privileges lost them, forced to seek other avenues. He strengthened the role of the FIA, granting it more authority to investigate suspicious transactions and identify violations. External auditors were introduced, an unprecedented step for the Vatican, which had always been extremely zealous about its independence and secrecy. The first criminal cases initiated in the Vatican against high-ranking officials for financial crimes became an important precedent, showing that no one is immune from justice. An example is the case of Cardinal Angelo Becciu, accused of embezzlement and abuse of power related to real estate investments. This demonstrates that Francis's reforms affect not only structures, but also specific individuals, impacting the most powerful figures in the Church's hierarchy. However, despite these decisive steps, the complete eradication of corruption remains a complex task. Like uprooting an ancient, deeply rooted tree whose roots have penetrated every crevice. How does the history of the IOR reflect broader problems of corruption and ethics in global institutions, not only religious ones, showing the universality of these challenges? The legacy of the CALVI scandal is still felt in the Vatican, influencing every decision about financial transparency. CALVI's death was not the end of the story, but merely the beginning of public awareness of its scale and depth. The investigation into his death continued for decades, uncovering new evidence and implicated individuals, gradually revealing the truth. CALVI's family fought for a long time for his murder to be recognized, disputing the official suicide verdict, which they found absurd and insulting. Repeated judicial reviews and the exhumation of CALVI's body confirmed suspicions of violent death, which spurred new investigations. The investigation pointed to the involvement of the Italian criminal underworld, which might have been interested in concealing financial connections extending deep into the Vatican's core. Names of crime bosses such as Pippo Calò surfaced in the context of CALVI's murder, linking him to powerful and ruthless organizations. These connections highlight how deeply the IOR was entangled in the network of organized crime in its deadly grip from which it was so difficult to escape. You'll never guess who else might have fallen victim to this web. Pope John Paul I, John Paul II's predecessor, also died under mysterious circumstances after only 33 days in office, barely having time to take over. Many believe that his death was linked to his intention to initiate large-scale reforms of the IOR that could have affected the interests of too many powerful people. Historical conspiracy theories link the deaths of John Paul I and Roberto CALVI, suggesting the existence of powerful forces capable of eliminating anyone who stands in their way, anyone who tries to disrupt the established order. The Vatican has always denied any connection between these events and criminal organizations, insisting on natural causes of death. However, the chain of mysterious deaths surrounding the IOR only amplified the aura of mystery and danger, making one wonder, what else was hidden behind this veil of secrecy that was worth such sacrifices? The scandals surrounding the IOR pushed for a reconsideration of the role of money in the Church at the deepest theological level. Discussions about whether wealth can serve as an instrument for good or inevitably leads to temptation have not subsided, continuing for centuries. The question of how the Church, which preaches poverty and humility, can manage billion-dollar assets remains central, causing constant debate. The IOR's financial resources are used to support missionary activities, education, and charity worldwide, performing many good deeds. But this same financial power created opportunities for abuse and corruption, like the flip side of a coin. The conflict between the practical necessity of having funds and the moral imperative of their purity tears the Church apart from within, placing it before a constant choice. The impact on Catholic doctrine concerning social justice and the ethical attitude towards wealth is immense, prompting a re-examination of many foundations. Turning to early Christian communities who shared everything equally as an ideal of financial purity becomes increasingly relevant, recalling original principles. Philosophical debates about the nature of the power of the keys and its extension to financial matters continue, questioning absolute authority. How did the IOR transform from a humble institution for monastic orders, managing small donations, into a global player with a dubious reputation, handling billions? The historical evolution of papal finances, from ecclesiastical taxes to modern investments, is a long and thorny path, full of compromises. The role of Jewish bankers in medieval Europe, who served the papal treasury when Christians were forbidden from usury, shows the antiquity of this connection between the Church and money. The emergence of the Pope's bankers as an influential force in the European economy of the Renaissance was an integral part of history, demonstrating the power of ecclesiastical finance. Swords and coins, how the papacy used finances to wage wars, maintain its power, and influence the political map of Europe. The separation of the ecclesiastical treasury from the Pope's personal property as one of the steps towards creating formalized institutions. This is an important stage in the history of papal finances, an attempt at systematization. The use of the IOR to bypass sanctions or for confidential international operations that could not be officially confirmed was common practice, demonstrating its unique flexibility. The impact of global economic crises on the Vatican's financial strategies and its desire to preserve assets is evident, as the Church is also an economic entity. The relationship between the IOR and other Vatican financial structures, such as the administration of the patrimony of the Apostolic See, APSA, creates a complex network that is difficult to untangle. The question of how many more such God's bankers are hidden in the shadows remains relevant. And what are we as a society prepared to do to ensure such stories are not repeated, to ensure truth prevails? We call for a conscious choice between the path of secrecy and the path of openness, between shadow and light, between good and evil. The true call to action lies in demanding accountability and transparency from all who manage public funds or moral authority, who hold high office. For only through constant vigilance and a willingness to change can the repetition of the sins of billions, which have cost society so dearly, be avoided. Otherwise, history will repeat itself, and the price of that repetition will be too high for trust in institutions and faith in humanity in its best qualities. Let us learn from past mistakes to build a future where the purity of goals will not be stained by the filth of worldly intrigues, where righteousness will prevail. May the light of truth dispel the shadows that envelop the Vatican Bank and serve as an example for all who seek justice. So, what role are we prepared to play in this ongoing battle for financial justice and moral purity? The choice is ours: to remain passive observers or to become active participants in the search for absolute truth.